The grand chamber of the Galactic Council was filled with the sounds of alien voices echoing off the walls. Representatives from every corner of the galaxy sat around a massive oval table, their eyes locked on the holographic screen that displayed Earth's location in the universe. The council members, beings of great power and age, looked at Earth with disdain. To them, Earth was just a young, unimportant planet with no place among the stars. Why do we even bother with them? One of the council members, a tall, green-skinned alien, scoffed. Humans are nothing but a primitive species. Their technology is laughable. They don't belong here. The others chuckled in agreement. One of the alien representatives, a creature with 6 arms and scales covering its body, added, "They haven't even mastered interstellar travel yet. What can they possibly offer to the galactic order? The humans are weak." Another voice, a deep and powerful tone, rumbled from a dark corner of the chamber. The speaker was a massive being, over 10 feet tall, its face hidden behind a shadowy hood. "The Earthlings think they can join us. Their entire history is nothing but war and destruction. If they were to join, they would be nothing but a burden." The members of the Galactic Council laughed, their voices echoing through the room. The humor in their words was clear. The humans were a joke. They were too young, too primitive, and far too weak to be taken seriously by any of the other galactic civilizations. The Council saw them as nothing more than a nuisance, a planet that would soon be forgotten in the grand scheme of the galaxy. The Council's decision was almost a formality at this point. The idea of humanity becoming part of the Galactic Alliance was laughable, and they quickly moved on to discussing more important matters. There was no place for humans among the stars, not in the eyes of the Galactic Council. But as they turned their attention to other matters, something was happening on Earth, something they didn't know about. On the surface of Earth, in the heart of the planet's most secure military base, a young officer named Captain Elias stood in front of a large screen. He was watching the Council's mockery unfold, listening to their words, and feeling the sting of their disdain. But instead of feeling helpless, he felt a fire ignite within him. "Elias, you're sure about this?" his second-in-command, Lieutenant Harris, asked, watching the captain's eyes narrow. "We've been preparing for years, but the Council, they're powerful. What if we're not ready?" Elias turned to his lieutenant with a determined look. "We're more than ready. We've been building our fleet in secret for decades. The Council doesn't know what's coming. They think we're weak. Let's show them what humanity can do." He walked over to a console and tapped a few buttons. On the screen, the image of a massive fleet of starships flickered into view. These weren't just any ships. They were the result of years of research and development. Humans had learned, adapted, and grown in ways the Council could never imagine. The ships were fast, powerful, and deadly. As Elias stared at the fleet, a voice over the intercom interrupted his thoughts. "Captain, the fleet is ready. We're awaiting your orders." Elias didn't hesitate. "Prepare to launch. We're going to show the galaxy what humanity is capable of." Back on the Galactic Council, the leaders were still discussing their plans when a strange signal reached their ships. A message from Earth. At first, they didn't understand what it meant. It was a simple transmission, something that seemed so insignificant, yet something felt off. The Galactic Council, so accustomed to power, dismissed it as a meaningless message. They had more important matters to attend to. No one paid attention to Earth's signal. The signal was sent as a warning, but no one heard it. The Council was too busy mocking the humans, believing that Earth had no place in the galaxy. They laughed at the thought of a planet so young, so inexperienced, challenging them. They had no idea what was coming. As the humans prepared their fleet, Captain Elias stood at the helm of his flagship, his mind racing. This was more than a mission. It was a statement. Humanity had been pushed aside for too long, laughed at, and underestimated. Now, it was time to change that. Elias knew that this was their one chance to prove they belonged in the galaxy. As the countdown to launch began, Elias looked out into the stars. He could feel the weight of history on his shoulders. The humans had always been seen as weak, but that perception was about to be shattered. Earth's fleet was about to make its mark on the galaxy. The Galactic Council had no idea what was about to hit them. The hum of the engines echoed through the control room as Earth's fleet prepared to leave the atmosphere. Captain Elias stood at the front, his eyes fixed on the massive holographic map of the galaxy, his mind racing with thoughts of the mission ahead. It was an unprecedented moment for humanity, a moment that would define the future of Earth among the stars. For too long, they had been mocked, dismissed as weak and insignificant by the Galactic Council. Now, Earth's time had come to prove them wrong. Behind him, his crew moved quickly, adjusting controls and monitoring their equipment. The tension in the room was palpable, but Elias could see the determination in their faces. They were ready. Each person aboard these ships had worked for years to make this possible, and now they would all share in the challenge ahead. "Captain," Lieutenant Harris spoke up, his voice steady but with a hint of uncertainty. "We've never faced anything like this. The Council is a force of nature. Do you really think we're ready?" Elias turned to his second-in-command, his expression serious but filled with confidence. "We have no choice. We've been preparing for this moment for years. The Council may have underestimated us, but that's exactly why we're going to surprise them. We're not just fighting for Earth, we're fighting for every human who has ever dreamed of something bigger than the walls around them." Harris nodded slowly, accepting Elias's words. They both knew the risks were high, but there was no turning back now. Elias turned back to the map, his eyes tracing the path their fleet would take through the stars. The journey would be long, but it was nothing compared to the journey humanity had already taken to get here. Outside the window of the command center, Earth's surface slowly receded as the fleet ascended into space. The city lights from the planet's surface flickered like stars themselves, fading as they passed through the atmosphere. It was a sight that filled every crew member with a sense of pride. They were no longer just people on Earth. They were becoming a force in the galaxy. The fleet wasn't huge compared to the great armadas of the galaxy, but it was powerful. Each ship was equipped with the latest technology, designed for speed, precision, and most importantly, strength. The weapons aboard these ships could match anything the Galactic Council had in terms of firepower, and their technology was designed to work in perfect harmony, a true testament to humanity's ingenuity and adaptability. Captain Elias glanced at the screen once more, watching as the coordinates for their next jump were locked in. The Council had no idea what was coming. While they continued to laugh at humanity's supposed weakness, Earth's fleet was preparing to strike with a force that would leave them in awe. As the fleet entered hyperspace, a ripple of energy passed through the ships. The stars outside the windows blurred into streaks of light, and the vast expanse of space seemed to stretch and warp around them. The journey was a leap into the unknown, but it was also a leap towards something far greater. The chance to show the galaxy that Earth was not to be underestimated. Back on the Galactic Council's homeworld, the leaders had finished their meeting. They were confident that humanity's attempts to engage in galactic politics would fail, just as they had predicted. They had dismissed the humans as no more than a curiosity, a species that had no place in the grand order of things. The council members were already moving on to other matters, their minds far from Earth's humble fleet. But the signal Earth had sent out earlier, the one the council had dismissed, suddenly flashed across their screens. This time, it wasn't a simple message. It was a burst of energy, a clear sign that something powerful was on its way. The council's arrogance wavered for just a moment as they realized that the humans were not as weak as they had thought. Still, they didn't panic. The council was too powerful to be threatened by one small fleet. They went about their business, unbothered by the potential threat. But as Earth's fleet exited hyperspace and entered the orbit of the council's homeworld, everything began to change. The fleet's sudden appearance in the star system sent a shockwave through the council's defense network. Their sensors picked up the human ships, and for the first time, They realized just how serious the situation had become. On the lead ship of the human fleet, Elias watched as the alien world came into view on the main screen. The time had come. The Council's arrogance would be their downfall. Earth's fleet had arrived, not to ask for permission, but to demand respect. "Prepare for engagement," Elias said calmly, his voice carrying authority. "This is our moment." The crew moved with precision, every member understanding their role. The countdown to their first move was mere seconds away. The moment they had all been waiting for was about to unfold. The tension in the control room was almost unbearable as Captain Elias stood at the helm of his flagship, his eyes locked on the display of the alien homeworld. The fleet was ready, and Earth's first strike was about to begin. Elias could feel his heart pounding in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. This was it. This was the moment that would determine everything. "All ships, hold position," Elias ordered, his voice steady, though a fire burned within him. "We need to be calculated in this first move. No one makes the first strike unless we're sure we can win." The crew followed his orders without hesitation, their eyes scanning the screen for any sign of the alien fleet. The Galactic Council, though confident and dismissive of Earth's capabilities, had no idea what was about to hit them. For a moment, everything was still, silent, almost too quiet, but Elias knew that silence before the storm was the most dangerous part. "Captain," Lieutenant Harris spoke up, his voice tight with the weight of the situation. "We've got incoming signals. It's them. There's no mistaking it." A holographic display flickered, and several shapes appeared, their silhouettes unmistakable. The Council's fleet had arrived. The human fleet wasn't large, but their ships were equipped with advanced weaponry and technology. They weren't here to ask for mercy. They were here to prove their strength. The alien fleet, though massive in comparison, began to position itself, forming defensive formations and calculating their counterattacks. The Galactic Council had far more ships, but Earth had something they didn't: unity, strategy, and the element of surprise. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers. Fire at will once we make contact," Elias commanded. His voice was calm, but beneath it was the weight of responsibility. The success of this mission depended on every move his fleet made, and the Council would be watching closely. Elias understood the stakes, but he also understood the importance of showing the galaxy that Earth was not weak. The first few moments of engagement were almost surreal. The human ships moved quickly, far faster than the Council had anticipated. A flash of bright light erupted as the first shots were exchanged. It wasn't an all-out battle yet, just a skirmish, a test of strength. Earth's fleet had superior agility, and their technology allowed them to strike from unexpected angles. The Council's ships, massive and lumbering, struggled to adapt to the speed and precision of the human fleet. "Captain, we've got a direct hit on their outer shield," one of the crew members called out, her voice tinged with surprise. They didn't expect this. Elias couldn't help but feel a rush of pride, though he kept his focus. The human fleet had hit the Council's ships where it hurt, leaving their enemies scrambling to adjust. The first taste of Earth's power had been delivered, and the Galactic Council didn't know how to react. "Keep up the pressure," Elias ordered, his voice low and determined. "Don't let up. If we show any weakness now, it could be over before we even get started." The enemy fleet, despite their initial shock, began to regroup, sending reinforcements from the far side of their formation. They weren't about to let this small fleet from Earth push them around. The first wave of alien ships advanced with a force that shook the surrounding space, but the human fleet wasn't intimidated. They had trained for this very moment, how to fight smarter, not harder. Their ships darted and weaved in the darkness of space, evading the enemy's attacks with precise moves, all while continuing to strike back with deadly accuracy. Elias watched the battle unfold, his mind calculating every move. The first few strikes had been successful, but the real challenge was still ahead. The Council would call in reinforcements, and those reinforcements would be the true test of humanity's resolve. But Elias wasn't concerned. He had trained for this. He knew that the human spirit, the drive to survive, would carry them through. "Captain," Harris spoke again, his voice quieter now. "We've got their flagship on the radar. They're moving toward us. It's coming right at us." Elias's eyes narrowed. The flagship of the Galactic Council was the heart of their entire fleet. If they could take it down, the Council's forces would collapse. But taking on their flagship was no small task. It was heavily armored and bristling with weaponry. But Elias knew one thing. The humans had something the Council didn't, a willingness to fight for their place in the galaxy. "All ships, form up," Elias commanded, his tone firm. "We're going after their flagship. This is the turning point. If we hit them hard now, we can take them down. But we need to be quick. We can't give them a chance to react." The human fleet, now united in purpose, began to close in on the flagship. Elias's hands gripped the controls as he watched the larger ships of the Council loom closer. The distance between them narrowed quickly, and the air in the control room seemed to grow heavier with each passing second. "Ready weapons," Elias ordered. His voice was sharp now, his focus unbroken. "Target their shield generators. We're going to break through their defenses." The countdown to engage their most powerful weapons began. The tension was thick, and the entire fleet seemed to hold its breath as they moved in for the decisive strike. They had been underestimated, but now the Galactic Council would know that humans were not to be taken lightly. The stars outside seemed to blur as Earth's fleet moved closer to the Galactic Council's flagship. Captain Elias stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the massive alien ship, watching it grow larger on the screen. The silence in the control room was almost deafening, broken only by the soft hum of the engines and the occasional command from the crew. This was the critical moment, the one that would determine everything. They were so close now, so close to showing the galaxy that humanity was not to be underestimated. "Captain," Lieutenant Harris spoke, breaking the silence. "We're almost in range. The flagship is starting to power up its defenses. They're preparing for a counterstrike." Elias's eyes flickered to the display. He could see the energy readings from the Council's flagship rising steadily. The enormous ship was preparing for a fight, but Elias wasn't worried. He had known from the beginning that this wouldn't be easy. But Earth had something the Council didn't: determination. The humans didn't fear the unknown. They embraced it. And that, Elias knew, was their greatest strength. "Prepare to fire," Elias commanded, his voice calm and steady despite the rising tension. "Make every shot count. We can't afford to miss." The crew moved quickly, their hands flying over the controls. Each person knew their role and understood the stakes. The first shots would determine the outcome of this battle, and no one could afford a mistake. Elias watched as the human ships took their positions, aligning themselves in a strategic formation around the flagship. They had planned for this moment for years, training and perfecting their tactics in secret. Now it was time to execute. The countdown began. The tension was unbearable. A moment passed, then another. And then, with a flash of light, the first salvo of energy blasts erupted from Earth's fleet. The beams of light streaked through the void of space, each one aimed precisely at the flagship's shield generators. For a moment, nothing happened. The Council's flagship seemed unscathed, its shields holding firm against the human assault. The alien ships had been designed to withstand incredible forces, and the first attack seemed like it hadn't even fazed them. But Elias wasn't discouraged. They had expected this. "Increase power to the next wave," he ordered, his eyes narrowing. "They're tougher than we thought, but we'll break through. Focus fire on their weak points." The crew responded quickly, amplifying the energy levels of their weapons. The human fleet fired again, but this time with more intensity. The beams of energy slammed into the flagship's shields, shaking the massive vessel. For the first time, the shields began to flicker, and Elias felt a surge of hope. They were getting through. But the flagship wasn't giving up easily. With a sudden jolt, the flagship's weapons powered up, and before Elias could react, a barrage of energy blasts shot out from the ship, aiming straight for Earth's fleet. The control room shook as the first wave of blasts struck the outermost ships in the human formation, their shields flaring as they absorbed the impact. "Stay in formation," Elias shouted over the noise. "Don't break ranks. Return fire." His crew moved with practiced precision. Despite the power of the alien flagship's counterattack, the human fleet held strong. They dodged and weaved, using their superior agility to avoid the worst of the blasts. Still, the damage was taking its toll. One of the human ships, a smaller vessel near the back of the formation, was struck directly. The ship shuddered violently as its shields collapsed, and it veered off course, trailing sparks and smoke. "Captain, one of our ships is out of commission," a crew member reported urgently. "They're trying to regain control, but they're losing power." Elias clenched his fists, his gaze never leaving the screen. "Get them back into formation if you can. They won't be left behind. We keep going." The fleet pressed forward, unrelenting. The humans were resilient, and their unity was evident. Each ship moved as one, attacking with precision and purpose, but the flagship was still formidable. The Council's ship fired relentlessly, each blast threatening to tear through the human formation. Elias knew they needed a new plan. They couldn't keep going at this pace forever. "Focus on their engines," Elias said, his mind racing. "If we can disable their propulsion, we'll have a chance to finish this." The human fleet adjusted its strategy, aiming their next barrage at the flagship's engine compartments. The ships fired with all their might, sending beams of energy toward the vulnerable areas of the ship. The flagship responded with another powerful volley of energy blasts, but the humans didn't back down. The two forces were locked in a deadly dance, each trying to outmaneuver the other. In the control room, Elias watched intently as the battle raged on. The energy readings from the flagship were beginning to fluctuate. Their shields were weakening, and their propulsion systems were starting to show signs of strain. The humans were making progress, but Elias knew they had to act fast. Time was running out, and the longer this battle continued, the more dangerous it would become. "Lieutenant Harris, prepare the final strike," Elias ordered, his voice unwavering. "We need to end this now. All ships, focus on the flagship's main reactor. That's where we finish this." The human fleet aligned once more, their ships firing in perfect unison. A single beam of energy, far more powerful than any before, shot toward the flagship. The blast hit its mark, and for a moment, everything was still. Then, the flagship's massive hull began to crack, its shields finally giving way under the relentless assault. The flagship shuddered as the energy blast pierced its armor, sending a shockwave through space. The crew of Earth's fleet watched, holding their breath, as the Council's flagship began to break apart. For a moment, it seemed like the battle was over. The massive ship was vulnerable, its once mighty defenses crumbling. But Elias knew better than to assume victory too soon. The Council's response would come soon, and he had no illusions about how much more he and his crew would have to face. The aftermath of the first strike was eerily quiet. The once bustling control room was filled with an anxious stillness as the human fleet regrouped. They had landed the first blow, but there was no time to celebrate. Elias knew that the Council would not let this setback go unpunished. The battle had only just begun. "Captain, the flagship is retreating," Lieutenant Harris reported, his voice filled with disbelief. "It's pulling away from the fight, but their other ships are closing in. They're preparing for a counterattack." Elias didn't take his eyes off the screen. The flagship may have been retreating, but the Council's fleet was still formidable. Their reinforcements were on the way, and the remaining ships were already moving to position themselves for a retaliatory strike. The humans might have surprised them once, but Elias knew that wouldn't be enough. The Council's arrogance was likely replaced with a cold determination to crush Earth's forces once and for all. All ships remain in position. Keep your shields at full power and be prepared for their next move, Elias ordered. His mind raced as he considered their options. He needed to strike decisively, but he couldn't risk making another move without carefully calculating the outcome. The Council would be watching every human ship, waiting for any sign of weakness. The fleet couldn't afford any mistakes. "Captain, we've got incoming reinforcements from the far side of their formation," a crew member called out. "Their ships are closing in fast. It's a large group, too many to fight all at once." Elias's eyes narrowed. The Council had clearly regrouped and were now bringing in their full might. The battle was shifting in their favor, but Elias wasn't ready to give up yet. The humans had one advantage the Council didn't: their ability to adapt. Earth's fleet might be smaller, but they were faster, smarter, and more resilient. And that, Elias knew, was a strength that couldn't be measured in size alone. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Elias said, his voice calm but filled with determination. "We'll use their numbers against them. If we spread them out, they'll be easier to target." The fleet adjusted its formation, each ship falling into position with practiced precision. The human ships moved swiftly, weaving and dodging as the Council's reinforcements bore down on them. The battle now became a dance, an intricate choreography of movements, with each ship fighting to outmaneuver the other. The human fleet may have been smaller, but their agility gave them a significant advantage. "Captain, their ships are targeting our smaller vessels," Harris said, his voice tight with concern. "If they're able to isolate and focus on them, they'll have an easier time overwhelming us." Elias's brow furrowed. The Council had done their homework, targeting the weaker ships in the human fleet. It was a tactical move, designed to break down the fleet from the inside out. But Elias wasn't about to let that happen. "Redirect fire to protect the smaller vessels," Elias commanded, his tone sharp. "Every ship is vital to our success. Don't let them separate us." The fleet adjusted once again, focusing their fire on the Council's ships as they moved in to surround the human vessels. It was a risky move, but Elias trusted his crew. The humans had a strength that the Council couldn't understand, a unity that was their greatest weapon. Together, they were unstoppable. For a moment, the space around them erupted in a cascade of bright lights and energy blasts. The human ships darted through the chaos, narrowly avoiding strikes as they retaliated with precise shots of their own. The smaller vessels, now protected by the larger ships, fought with a newfound ferocity. They had been underestimated, and now they were proving their worth. "Captain, we've damaged their rear formations," a crew member called out. "We've broken through their line." Elias allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction, but his focus never wavered. The battle was far from over, and the Council would not back down easily. He knew they had to push forward now, while they still had the upper hand. "All ships, full speed ahead," Elias ordered, his voice unwavering. "We pushed them back. We've gained ground, and we're not stopping now." The human fleet surged forward, its ships moving with renewed energy. The Council's ships, though numerous, were struggling to keep up with the humans' swift movements. The once unassailable formation was breaking apart, their ships scattered and disorganized. The humans were slowly but surely turning the tide. But the Council wasn't finished yet. From the rear of their formation, a new fleet of ships emerged, larger and more powerful than any that had come before. These ships were a last-ditch effort to turn the battle in the Council's favor. Their weapons were formidable, and their defenses were nearly impenetrable. The Council had thrown everything they had into this final assault. "Captain, we've got incoming, large vessels," Harris warned. "They're coming in hot. This is their final push." Elias's mind raced as he considered their options. This would be the most difficult part of the battle. The humans had fought hard, but the Council's final reinforcements were unlike anything they had faced before. The battle was nearing its climax, and every second counted. "Brace yourselves," Elias said, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "This is it. We finish this now, or we don't finish at all." The fleet moved forward, closing in on the Council's final line of defense. The next few moments would determine whether Earth's fleet could emerge victorious. Elias knew that no matter the outcome, humanity had already proven something important to the galaxy. They had shown that they were a force to be reckoned with. But would it be enough to secure their future in the stars? The final moments of the battle seemed to stretch on endlessly, the tension thick in the air. Elias stood at the helm of his ship, his eyes never leaving the view screen as the human fleet continued its relentless advance toward the Galactic Council's final line of defense. The massive, heavily armed ships of the Council were coming closer, and though their numbers were overwhelming, Elias refused to show fear. This was the moment. The final test. The humans had fought this far, and now it was up to them to finish what they had started. "Captain, our sensors are picking up energy signatures from their flagship," Lieutenant Harris reported, his voice calm but filled with urgency. "It's charging up. They're preparing something big." Elias's mind raced. The Council had something planned, some last-ditch weapon or maneuver to try to break the human fleet. The stakes had never been higher. If the humans failed now, it could mean the end of their efforts to show the galaxy that they were not a force to be underestimated. "Do we have a countermeasure?" Elias asked, keeping his voice steady. "Negative, Captain," Harris replied. "Whatever they're preparing is beyond our capabilities. We'll have to outmaneuver them." Elias clenched his fists, watching as the Council's ships drew closer. The human fleet was battered, with several ships damaged, but the spirit of the crew was unbroken. They had come this far by working together, and they would continue to fight as one. Elias couldn't afford to doubt them now. "We can do this," Elias muttered to himself, more as a reassurance than anything else. "We've faced worse, and we've won." The human ships, though smaller and less powerful, had proven their strength and resilience in ways the Council had not expected. Their ability to adapt, to think on their feet, had kept them alive this long. But now, with the Council's full might focused on them, it would take every ounce of strength and ingenuity the humans had to turn the tide. The countdown began. Elias's heart pounded as he watched the huge alien ships prepare for their final attack. The energy readings were off the charts. The flagship, its enormous form towering over the other ships, was readying something that could obliterate everything in its path. "Brace for impact," Elias shouted, his voice steady despite the storm of thoughts swirling in his head. This was the moment where everything would either fall into place, or it would all come crashing down. The entire fleet moved into position, the smaller ships weaving and dodging as they closed in. They were making themselves difficult targets, constantly shifting and adapting to the changing battlefield. The massive alien ships had formidable weapons, but their sheer size made them less agile. The humans had learned to use their speed and unpredictability to their advantage. Now was the time to strike. "Focus all fire on their engines," Elias commanded. "We need to disable their ability to fight back. Keep them on the defensive." The human fleet responded, their weapons firing in unison, each blast of energy aimed precisely at the heart of the alien ships. The flagship, its massive hull lit up by energy beams, was beginning to show signs of strain. The human fleet was making progress, but Elias knew that the Council would retaliate with everything they had. Then, the Council's flagship fired. A brilliant, blinding beam of light shot toward the human fleet, moving faster than anything Elias had ever seen. It was unlike any weapon the humans had ever faced, its destructive power vast and unrelenting. For a moment, everything seemed to slow down, the sheer scale of the attack overwhelming. Elias's breath caught in his chest as he watched the beam race toward them. If it hit, there would be nothing left. "Evade!" Elias screamed, knowing there was no time to hesitate. "All ships, scatter. Get out of the way." The human fleet split apart, each ship dodging as best they could, but the beam was too fast. The first few ships in the front line took the full brunt of the attack, their shields flashing bright before they collapsed under the sheer force. But the others, the ships further back, had a chance to evade. One by one, they swerved out of the way, narrowly avoiding the devastating blast. The shockwave from the attack rippled through space, a wave of energy that rocked every ship. The human fleet reeled, but they held firm. The flagship of the Council may have unleashed its devastating weapon, but it had not won. The humans had survived. And now they had a chance to finish what they had started. Target their propulsion systems. Elias commanded again. We need to stop them from escaping. They cannot be allowed to regroup. The fleet locked in on their target, their weapons firing in rapid succession. They knew that the Council's flagship was crippled, but it was still dangerous. Elias's eyes darted between the displays, watching as his ships closed in. The Council's flagship was starting to move slower, its ability to fight back weakening as the human ships closed in for the final strike. Then, just as it seemed they would have the victory in their grasp, a new signal flared to life on the screen. More ships, massive ships, were appearing from the shadows of the distant stars. The reinforcements the Council had called upon were arriving, and they were far more powerful than anything the humans had faced before. A new wave of fear swept over the control room as the numbers of the enemy swelled. The humans had underestimated just how much the Council could bring to bear in their darkest hour. Elias's heart raced, but he refused to give in to fear. There was still hope. They had fought this long, and they would continue to fight. This was not the time to back down. All ships, fall back. Elias ordered. Regroup. We're not done yet. We'll take the fight to them, together. The human fleet, battered but unbroken, began to shift positions, preparing for another assault. The fight was far from over, but Elias's resolve had never been stronger. The humans had already proven themselves. They were strong, they were united, and they were ready to stand against whatever the galaxy threw at them.